Hey everyone, welcome to Behind the Sermon. I'm your host, John Rhodes, and this is our speaker from Sunday, Mr. Chris Gregg, senior minister here at First Christian Church. How you doing today, Chris?
Doing great, John. How are you?
I'm great. Can't complain. I had a wonderful time at Country Day yesterday.
Awesome.
It was a fun time for everybody.
Yep.
Joe Milner's chicken song will be remembered
Bok,
for
bok,
years.
bok, bok, bok.
Yep, that'll be remembered for years to come. I'm sure.
Chicken in the sky.
Yeah. You ever been a chicken farmer?
I have not.
Yeah.
No desire to ever be a chicken farmer.
No, you don't want to run after the chickens and go chase them or
I
anything?
do not.
Okay, we'll leave that to CJ then. So
There you go. And maybe perhaps the Rhodes family.
Perhaps us someday.
Someday, maybe chicken farmers as well.
Yep, we got enough land for it. We got about 2 acres, so hopefully someday. But we're just trying to get the house in order at this point. So.
Yep. I would be more of a horse guy.
Oh yeah.
If I had to choose an animal that I could ride the range.
You could ride your horse to work if you need
Ride
to.
my horse to work.
There you go. That'd be something.
There
See
you
the
go.
senior minister commenting on his horse.
There you go.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us today. Remember, if you have any questions you would like answered, you can always submit those on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Just go ahead, send those to us, direct message, or we always make a post letting people know that we're going to have this, so you can always do that as well. Chris, yesterday was Country Day.
Absolutely.
And I was wondering to myself during it, we have a lot of folk who I would say rate a 10 on the country scale.
Right.
And that's great for them. I'm not knocking anybody for rating a 10.
Right.
How would you rate? On a scale of 1 to 10, from 1 being New York City slicker, never worked with a power drill in my life, to 10 being I only know the outdoors, don't sit me down anywhere because I'm going to be on the outdoors. How country are you?
I would say, because I was raised in the avenues in Terre Haute, but outside of that, about 4th or 5th grade, we moved out into the country. And so I would say probably an 8 or a 9.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, I'm used to the rural life, and I like it. Very comfortable with power tools and hunting and fishing, those type of things. Don't know much about horses or riding, but one of my goals in retirement would be to spend a summer out west cowboying it up.
There you go.
So that's the kind of
Cowboy Chris.
country. Cowboy Chris would be okay.
That's the new sermon name right there.
Give me a home where the buffalo roam and the antelope play.
All right, it's not Country Day anymore.
All right, it's not Country Day.
Country Day is
Cowboy
yesterday.
up.
No more
Cowboy
Country
up.
Day.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris, for your country emphasis and talking through that. We appreciate your countryness.
Well, you need to know that.
Yeah, we got to know.
Obviously.
We got to know. But let's dig into the sermon a little bit.
All right.
Right now. Yesterday, you made a point, and I forget which verse it was, but it was in the book of Ephesians. You said, give no opportunity. Well, the scripture says, give no opportunity to the devil, referencing our anger.
Absolutely.
You know, anger makes us susceptible to sin.
Absolutely.
When we feel angry, it's opening a door. And lack of other words, opening a door to sin in our lives. You know, I thought to myself, no one ever said, I'm so angry right now, I'm going to love you. You know, I'm so angry at you, I'm going to love you. Nobody ever says that or anything. So my question is, does every sin come from anger? Would you say that every sin or the majority of sins comes from anger?
I'm sure every sin would come from anger. There's righteous anger, like I talked about yesterday, about like we're angry about child abuse or human trafficking or people starving in third world countries or even here in our hometown. Those type of things. Might be angry at criminals who harm innocent people or a drunk driver killing an innocent family. You know, those are things we can be angry about in a righteous way. But most of our anger is self-centered, and that's where it gives the devil a foothold and a campground or a camp area in our lives to spread the poison and produce harm. And it also, our anger, many of the times, hurts the party that it's directed at or the collateral damage, those that are around us when we're expressing that anger.
Yeah, so you talked about how that anger that leads to sin comes from pride and selfishness. So would you say that pride and selfishness is really where sin comes from in our lives?
Absolutely. And we got to remember that anger is unfulfilled expectation many of the times.
Right.
We expect things a certain way. We expect that driver not to cut us off.
Right.
Not to hide in my blind spot.
Right.
We expect our spouse to cook dinner on time.
They should
and
do everything
clean the
for us.
house.
Right.
That's our expectations. And so unrealistic expectations increases our anger level, and a lot of it's all about us, what
Right.
we think.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. That's an awesome point to come back to. You know, it really just comes from us having too high of expectations, maybe for other people. And like you said, there is such thing as righteous anger. You know, being angry about child abuse, being angry about the way somebody treats somebody else.
Right.
That's not too high of expectations. That's just,
Right.
you know, hoping
Common
people
courtesy,
are
common grace.
good, solid human beings. You know, anger comes when someone or something makes us miserable. Us.
Right.
You know, more often than not.
Right.
Maybe we'll get upset if somebody hurts somebody else, but more often than not, it comes from when we're miserable. What happens when we are miserable with ourselves because we're angry at ourselves? We talked a lot about being angry with other people, but you know, what if you're angry with yourself or miserable because you're angry at what you've done or you know, putting yourself down on the inside? How do we solve that anger?
A lot of us have internal talk that's very negative, very critical, very self-condemning, because we don't meet our own expectations. Obviously, we probably need to confess that to God, to repent, but also let ourselves off the hook in the sense of, yeah, I blew it again, but at least I'm trying. At least I know the direction I'm going.
Right.
And again, all that frustration and anger really doesn't help us achieve anything. We need to call on God's grace and our friends and those around us and confess our sin and just say, hey, I'm really struggling with this.
Yeah.
And have some accountability, or maybe some troubleshooting, or maybe a lot of people are experiencing the same thing in their own lives, and so we're not alone.
Right. Yeah. And that's the important thing, is when you go through it alone, oftentimes, like you said, that negative speech can be in your own head so much. And sometimes people have so much negative speech in their own mind that all they want to blurt out is positive speech about themselves, to the point where it becomes arrogant.
Right.
You know,
well,
we look
it
at those
appears
people.
arrogant, but when we have to tell other people how good we are, a lot of times that's overcompensation for feeling so bad about ourselves.
Right. And that's why it's important that when somebody is angry or somebody does seem to be upset with themselves, offer to talk with them, offer to be there with them. I can't tell you how many times I've been upset with something I did myself, and somebody else noticed and they said, hey John, what's going on? Is there something going on right now? And that just means the world to somebody. You know, you can say it probably would mean the world in your own life if it happened.
Stop and encourage them and say, hey, I've done that. You may consider it a failure, but it's a failure in the right direction.
Right.
Done that before, failed before, made some mistakes.
Right. Yeah.
Who hasn't?
Who hasn't? You're right. And that leads into what I was going to say next. You know, at one point you said, I think it was one of the last things you said was, release my right to get even.
Right.
You know, we want to talk about how, well, I have the right to do this to this person. I have the right to get even with them. You know, it reminded me, when you're talking about that, it reminded me of John 8, verses 1 through 11.
Right.
The story of the woman caught in adultery.
Right.
And Jesus basically said, hey, any of you who are perfect, go ahead.
Right.
You know, it was
Right.
like, hey, any of you who have in my mind, it was almost like, hey, any of you who have the right to get even, because you've never done anything wrong, you know, go ahead.
Right.
And then the one man who never did anything wrong, of course, Jesus, let her go on.
Right.
And so I want to ask, because we talked a lot about Paul yesterday, you know, how would you say Jesus would tell us to respond to our anger? We talked a lot about Paul and what he said, but in that time when Jesus was walking around teaching, preaching, how would he tell us to respond to our anger, whether it's toward ourselves or toward somebody else?
I think he said in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, you know, if you're really angry at somebody, and I think the word is reka in the Sermon on the Mount, then you're guilty of killing that person if you have that kind of hatred. And of course, he's over-exaggerating that point to say, stop and think about this.
Right.
Be angry and not sin, again, is what basically Jesus is looking at in that moment. We are to love the individual, hate the sin, and at the same time, Jesus told the woman caught in adultery, go and sin no more.
Right.
So he wasn't letting her off the hook, but he said, neither do I condemn you. He extended grace. And so in our anger, I would say, he would say, hey, who is this really about?
Yeah.
Is it about you and your unfulfilled expectations? Are you making other people miserable and causing sin in this situation? How about taking a breath and repenting of that anger and trying to work toward a solution, using that anger and that energy and that anger toward a solution that is positive and loving and kind,
Right.
which takes a lot. It's really, really hard
Yeah, no,
to
it is.
do
It
in
is.
the moment, because you're slighted, you've been disrespected, you feel uncared for. I mean, seriously.
Right, and nobody wants to feel that way.
Why wouldn't you want to fulfill my expectation? Do you not care about me?
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to drop all of that to do this. And I struggle with this.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, in those quiet moments, anger is one of my worst enemies, but it's also why the devil gets a foothold, and I got to repent of this over and over and over again, just like everybody else in our culture.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I've heard people say to me before, look, if you're angry, sometimes that's just a natural human emotion. It's in the moment.
Right.
You know, it happens. It's not so much, you know, the act of getting angry
Right.
that is a sin, but it's just the actions that come after it.
The emotion isn't wrong.
Right.
That should be an internal guide that, hey, something isn't going right,
Right.
and I have unfulfilled expectations, and at the same time, I've got to recognize it for what it is.
Right.
And is it really healthy? And most of the time, it's not healthy
Right.
for me or anybody else.
Right, of course. And remember that what we're talking about here is anger between somebody who probably is not doing harm to yourself or somebody else. Obviously, if there's somebody in
Right.
someone's life who is
Right.
harming somebody else, abusing somebody,
Right.
anything like that, that's
Right.
something that needs to be taken seriously.
Right.
You know, and we need to go find help for that person.
Right.
It's not out of revenge. It's not out of
Right.
hatred.
Right.
It's because we love that person and we
Right.
want to help them. And sometimes the only way to do that
Right.
is by pulling the other person
Right.
away from them. So,
Right.
well, thank you so much for joining us today on Behind the Sermon. Remember that we do have the sermon up on the podcast on our website. So if you would like to, you can always go listen to the full sermon there. Chris and I just give a little snippet and have conversation about it. We know that some of you like this and some of you enjoy it. We enjoy doing it.
Absolutely.
So, you know, we hope that you all enjoy this. And if you didn't get a chance to listen to the sermon yesterday, you go back and listen to it today, tomorrow, whenever you get the chance. Any final thoughts, Chris?
Nope.
Nope. You're done talking
Be
about anger.
angry and sin not.
All right, there you go. Don't give a foothold
Advice
to the
for
devil.
today.
There you go. All right. Thank you so much for joining us here, Chris. Thank you for joining us for Behind the Sermon. We will see you again next time.